Ladies and gentlemen, John Darnielle. Hi, welcome to the Enoch Pratt Free Library and the 12th Annual CityLit Festival. My name is Gregg Wilhelm. I'm the Executive Director of CityLit Project. And for you astute viewers, will notice that I am not Tom Hall. Tom Hall from WYPR blew his knee out the other week and actually had the arthroscopic surgery this past Thursday and is off his feet for a bit. But I hope you had a chance to hear his interview with John on Maryland Morning this past Friday, which was really great for them to do, so I appreciate that. So I'll be sitting in for Tom and introducing and having a conversation with John. Get this up first. We're searching the building for a cup of coffee for John. It's all right. I'm going to flip the script a little bit and introduce John first and foremost as an author. Not only an excellent author, but his book, his first novel, his debut novel, which we'll talk about that nomenclature because I think that's cheating a little bit. Was
stormed out of outrage. How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Well, regardless, whenever in your career you get nominated for the National Book Award, as John's book, novel Wolf and White Man did last fall, it just makes my, you may storm out after I say this, it just makes my hatred quotient for you go up exponentially, as John is obviously a poet and a lyricist and a novelist. Oh, he's also in this band called the Mountain Goats. You might want to give them a round of applause for that as well. If you glimpse at John's website, it will reveal a pretty insane and intense schedule of travel that he's been up to in support of the Mountain Goats' latest album, Beat the Champ, which is about that ageless literary trope, professional wrestling, which is strictly UHF material, as you're saying in other areas. So I really want to thank John for squeezing in a trip here to Baltimore. I think literally you've got maybe like 10 days between gigs and you're spending a portion of that here. So thanks a lot. John has 2 little kids and he's retired a lot and misses his family. So really appreciate him coming up to Baltimore. I'm a sucker for place when it comes to music and writing. And John has these ongoing songs about the going to songs. And one of your songs is Going to Maryland. So I want to welcome you back to Maryland, and but specifically the great city of Baltimore in this end of a very trying and difficult week, but hopefully a week that's going to turn into some good news for this town and for some communities and people who have been struggling in this town for decades. So I appreciate you also flying in and putting up with the curfew tonight.
Sure. Well, yeah, I was going to go out and party really late. I'm a legendary, close all the clubs kind of guy. So.
You have the 9:55. But speaking of Baltimore and this place, I'm going to start my conversation with John. I'm going to start this conversation. Get a cup of coffee. In the middle of Wolf and White Man, which I hope you've had a chance to read, and you'll get that book signed later today. But in the middle of the book, something that caught my eye, and I actually made a marginal note about Baltimore, and maybe we could start a conversation here where you say, but generally, the only way we ever know anything about anything is if something goes wrong. And I think you were saying that in the context of your protagonist's life.
Well, he said that. It's not a statement I'm making.
Right. But can you reflect a little bit about that and maybe some of the things we're trying to learn from what's gone wrong or happened in Baltimore?
Well, I mean, this is I think I want to distance myself from my narrator, but at the same time, I think I do agree that we don't. You don't notice much about your body until it hurts, or feels profound pleasure, which is not wrong, until there's some variation from the norm, right? And I think that's true, right? That is sort of, and I don't know why it is that stasis is sort of you regard as this condition of ignorance, right? Of a kind of an ignorance you pursue, or a joy, right? But when something goes wrong, it's when you notice things. I'm thinking about, like right now, I jammed a guitar pick into my right between my, what do you call the area between your fingernail and flesh there. I was reaching my pocket to get one, and the new pick went way in. It was in Louisville, right? So it still hurts, right? Otherwise, I would not be thinking about the tips of my fingers at all. I'm barely conscious of them all the time, right? And so that's what he means, is that, that there's any given part of your body. You don't know how your elbow feels unless I mention, hey, how's your elbow right now? And you go, oh, well, I hadn't really thought about it. But if I break your elbow, then you'd be very conscious of your elbow all day long, right? So,
this story is told in a very unique fashion. It's told essentially backwards, and all from within the head of the protagonist, Sean, which I have to commend you for, maintaining that perspective. Everything's happening inside the head of the protagonist, and it's going backwards. You do some nice shifts in, one of the first things you're warned about is, well, never write, the past tense, always active, or in a flashback, try to be active. But you do nice shifts within this extended, looking backward, novel-length treatise. One of the themes, because you use the word repetitively, is this focus, this idea of focus. And I've marked a few times when you do that, to the point where even Sean's company's name is Focus Games. Can you talk a little bit maybe about the way the theme of focus plays within this story?
So that's a very good question, because I'm always talking about this, that like, a point of resistance I used to always have in writing classes is they describe writing as though you conceive of a theme and then you address that theme. But that's never been what I've done. And my most successful in terms of like, I like it best stuff. I don't know what I'm doing when I enter onto it. I just start doing a thing, and the thing comes out, right? And this is why I will never teach a writing seminar. I say, well, do a thing, right? And then you will see that it's great to do things. Thank you. I'll go get my check, and I'll see you all next week. But I assume, I have faith that I'm writing about something, right? That there's something that rises up from it, and I hadn't thought of how where your focus rests is a big part of it. It's called, I don't remember why I called it Focus Games. It just seemed like a funny thing to call it, like something a teenager might call it. If you haven't read the book, it's narrated by a guy named Sean Phillips, who suffered a catastrophic injury when he was a teenager. And he designs a game that you play through the mail in the internet age, in the pre-internet age. It's a turn-based mail game, so it takes place in the future, right? And you read a scenario at the end of each scenario. There's 4 choices, and you send in your choice, and you're sent back the corresponding scenario. And it's kind of like if you were playing an 8-bit video game, but having to come back every week to go to the next screen, right? So, and his company's called Focus Games, and like all I thought when I was thinking of it is like, well, that's the sort of name you might come up with in 1982, for your game. But I think the book is also about, where you let your focus rest and what it's like to focus in the wrong place. I don't know, even wrong place, but what it's like to let your focus rest in some place that's unsafe or unfamiliar or unstable.
Right. And often Sean would have to focus to get the noise out of his head.
Yeah. He's got tinnitus. He's aggravated tinnitus.
Right. Did the thought of focus come through any of, like, when you guys sit down day after day, or whenever you find the time to return to the writing of this particular novel, months of being a father and a musician?
Yeah.
And it's, my understanding would be that it would be a hard book to focus on as a creator. How did you step back into that stream?
So this is the unromantic story of the writing of the book. Is like after I turned in my first, there was a novella that I wrote called Master of Reality. It's a critical essay about a Black Sabbath album, but it's through a fictional lens. And I finished it, and I was so stoked when I was done with it. I handed it, oh my God, you actually finished the thing. It's going to go to press. This is awesome, right? So I just started writing another book. You know, I was like, that was great. I want to do another one, right? And I wrote what became the last chapter of this. And I just sort of tinkered away at it when I had spare time for a year or two, you know. And in the meantime, Master of Reality had come out, and again, Chris Paris-Lam, who you know, who's my agent, had contacted me and said, well, if you ever wrote anything else, we'd love to represent you, no obligation. So I signed a thing with him. I said, yeah, I don't know when I'm going to finish this. I'm too busy with the band, so I don't know. And I wasn't really, I was just, you know, it was a thing to do when I wasn't doing other stuff, right? And there was so many, there were many, many narrators. Like originally there was only the one chapter by Sean, and there was a chapter by his dad, there was a chapter by a preacher because he goes to an evangelical church that wants to exploit him and all these other things. But I wasn't, it was spare time stuff. And then Chris called and said, hey, no pressure, but if you have anything that you wanted to show to some publishers, we could put it together and see if anybody was interested. And I thought, well, you know, I hammered 6 chapters together and sent them to him. I'd had the idea at that point of telling him backwards. And then somebody wanted it, so he put a deadline on it, and then I finished it. It's like, I would still be just messing around with it today, and I would be pretty interested by that process, because I think I can never remember who it is who says that work is never finished, only abandoned. But that's what a book feels like, is like, you know, you decide to say, well, I'll go this way, but there's so many ways you might go on. It's infinite, just like in your own life, you know. And so yeah, I mean, much of it was kind of arbitrary and driven by happenstance.
Are you a gamer?
I am now. I never played. I only played one session of D&D when I was in junior high. I mean, one afternoon.
Right.
I played a lot of video games.
I hated that stuff.
Well, no, it's good. D&D itself is kind of a little too math-based, is the problem with it. Like, there's not a lot of room for free play. You know, it's going to be more about constantly throwing dice and slaying the beasts, which I'm into that actually now too, because the beasts are cool, right? But there's many other games. There's a designer I play with, Jason Morningstar, whose games are very open and free, and most of them have no dice at all, or if they do, it's only every so often. But it's more like improv comedy, but usually more improv drama. You sit around. And he's got a new game called Night Witches, which is about these Soviet pilots, these women who flew these cheap planes, and they were just interference missions. Like, they'd fly a plane toward the front to distract the Nazis so that you could move, so that the men could move in toward them, right? Most of these women got killed, right? Their planes were terrible, right? They were there to get shot at, right? And maybe to release a bomb or two if they could. Jason said, this whole game where you play these pilots, right? And you just, you start with very low points and you lose them. You don't improve your plane. You try not to lose it, right? But everybody dies in this game. Right? So it's great.
Well, I'm actually a bit surprised that you said that you've only really kind of come into gaming lately.
No, I didn't get into it until I read the book.
Yeah, right.
My friends started asking me, like, so.
Why'd you pick that device then? I mean, what am I doing?
So this is one of those things that, you know, I talked about how I sort of always been resistant to writing workshops and stuff, like, you know, when you write collaboratively with people who are good at it, are good at brainstorming. So what happens next? What's the guy like? Tell me, does he have a mustache? And you do that the first few times, you're really uncomfortable. But I had done a thing, just an idea for a TV show that never went anywhere, with a friend of mine who's a Hollywood guy. He did a movie, what's it called, Room 237, that one about The Shining, right? Tim Curry, one of the guys who did that. We were developing, just kicking around an idea about a TV show about werewolves. And he was really good at saying, so, tell me about their human friend. Where's she from? What's her deal, right? And I became comfortable with that. And so when I was writing this, you know, I had this guy, and he's disfigured, and I said, well, how does he make rent? You know, you have to have money, right? Or you live on the street, you know, and if he doesn't live on the street, he has an apartment. I know, because I'd already been seeing his apartment. And so that's why I throw him out of the apartment, I gotta give him some money, right? So either he can have a big settlement from a lawsuit, which is in there kind of, right? but he has to have some kind of income, right? And so I thought, well, what can you do, if it's very, very hard to get a job because of how you look, right? And I thought, well, you do mail order of some kind. And I had a brief moment of thinking, yeah, he'll sell music by mail order, just like all the people that I knew coming up in the '90s. But I didn't want it to be music based, so I thought, what's he into?
Right.
And that's how I came up with it.
But it works perfectly because it allows you to basically Sean creates the world that is the Trace Italian.
The baby can stay, by the way. I'm a father of 2, so if she makes a little bit of noise, it's not even a big deal. I mean, it's just totally fine. Anybody hates on the child, I will personally get money. Totally cool.
Because because it's during that long time of Sean's initial recovery in the hospital, well, that's not going to be very exciting to try to describe, but it's within that time frame that he's starting to conjure up as the Trace Italian. So just because that wasn't hard enough for you to try to master, you said it in this world, the 1990s, where this game is played, by mail order.
It's the 80s.
But the 80s. I thought it was 1990 where it started.
No, it has to be pre-internet.
Yeah, well, that's
Well,
where I was going with the, trying to be anachronistic.
No, there is internet by the time we get to by the end. We start in the 90s.
So, I mean, did you find it difficult to, I can't talk about email there, just putting your...
No, I actually found that really natural because I think when it's still less so now than it was in the mid-90s, but whenever those elements of a technology that's still functionally new enter narrative, they usually read kind of like people are trying too hard, especially go watch Law and Order, right, from 7 years ago, and they'll have, some sort of dating site called BeFriends, right? It's actually Friendster, right? But really awkward, and it dates really badly. Go see that Sandra Bullock movie, The Net, right? And all these sorts of things. And I thought, well, cool. I found a way to not have to do that because that technology is still evolving so much that it's sort of like if you go read, people trying to use cars in books of the 20s. The car is too new. They don't know how to talk about it. The vocabulary isn't settled yet. So that was actually, I'm writing a thing now where I'm trying to figure out what all to do with that kind of stuff.
Right, well, like the first Die Hard movie where Willis is running from payphone to payphone. I don't understand the premise of this movie. What's he running from to what to what?
So here's the thing: if you read fiction from the late '90s, people will consistently identify cell phone, right? But now it's integrated enough that I just say, well, I call him on the phone, and everybody pictures me with something coming out of my pocket and going back into my pocket. I don't have to specify cell phone, right? And so whereas with internet stuff, I think the way to weave it into fiction is still in flux.
Let's talk a little bit about the three players that you sort of highlight throughout the novel. You have a player named Chris who fails, right? Who stops, who gets kind of concerned about the integration of the game into his life.
Yeah.
Then you have Carrie, who dies in the course of playing, and Lance, who survives, but is frostbite, with some hands and feet and stuff. So they were getting, over the course of the novel, they're getting more and more involved with, they're trying, they're transitioning the game into real life, which I think it's interesting. I might touch a little bit about your music background. About and when I was a kid, I was sort of don't listen to the record backwards, don't listen to the lyrics, and you might transition those lyrics into real life. So were you sort of what was your motive behind the sort of these three characters and their three different reactions to the interaction with the game, and ultimately, I guess, what's wrong?
Yeah, I don't know about a motive. I'm kind of blunt as far as characters go. I don't want them to stand in for some tendency, right? They're people, right? And so I want them to be who they are first and foremost. It's like with Lance and Carrie, I wanted there to be people who you like, who you sort of unambiguously like. They struck me as likable people, good young people. And then Chris Haynes came in late when I was trying to think, well, we only know these two people who play, right? Who else? There have to be other people, right? And I thought, well, I thought of the question of how people age out of stuff. It's like happened to me. It's like, you're really super into something, and then you turn around and you see all these books in your bookshelf from your, Spanish detective fiction phase that you don't really read that stuff anymore, right? And it's like, and you like it fine, but it's like you have moved along to Japanese detective fiction or whatever, which is awesome, by the way. But I thought that was for Chris. I wanted there to be somebody who had been there and come out, and I also wanted a foil because you only have these two players who had come to harm.
Right.
But Sean repeatedly asserts that really playing the game is a thing people can just do. So I wanted somebody for whom that was true.
Because Sean was unaware of what the power of what he was creating had on other people. And that's an interesting thing. Can you talk a little bit about that, or pack down a little bit about how, as a creator, you make this relic, but you have no control of how that product is going to be received and acted upon. That must happen a lot, maybe in your musical career. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question because it's like in this extreme case, like I don't think anybody imagines that. For one thing, I'm writing stuff that tends to take place in the world, and there's no hidden treasure. Right? If somebody hears a hidden message in my song, that speaks more to them than to me. Right? Whereas he's playing this game, it's like a maze, and so it's fair enough for people to go, "Look, it's a maze. It leads somewhere." There's that. But I think he's not a typical creator insofar as the distance he wants to give himself from the results that play out. I'm not sure how much he deserves it. He knows that. He does the thing where he sends a scalpel to Chris Haynes, right? That's he crosses this line where there has to be this gulf between the person who makes something and the people who do stuff with it. And for Sean, because he's lonely, I think he sort of breaches that gulf a little bit. I don't want to assign blame. I think a lot of the book is about not wanting to assign blame, not wanting to describe causes where the causes are actually blurry, But yeah, I mean, there is a question like, if you write a book called "Go Out and Buy Stock in Apple," right, then you don't get a say. Well, I didn't mean for people to go buy stock in Apple, but if you create some imaginary world, and other people who also hunger for imaginary worlds sort of like carry the dream a little further into this world that it belongs. There's a question of like who bears the responsibility for that.
I think that leads me to a question I wanted to touch upon about his parents and blame and guilt, responsibility. His father.
Right.
When we first meet Sean's father, I just love this scene. First of all, I like the father's voice. It's the way it's written. Even before you later in the novel use the word stutter, it's a stuttery voice, and that I think says a lot. It's interesting, and the words he chooses to repeat in his exchange with Sean. But the first time you meet Sean's father, he is stuttering because he's nervous to try to explain to Sean why he doesn't want Sean to come to the grandmother's funeral. And that's just talk to us a little bit about this father and the role that this father plays.
Why don't I read those scenes?
Awesome. Great. That's not you. Cool. You find it.
So there's a little setup scene here with his nurse Vicky. I caught Vicky looking at my face in the light. I was sitting at my desk with some old pictures I dug out from an unmarked box. Me and my grandma running with geese somewhere. The zoo, I guess. Or on vacation. I wasn't sure. If I'm in a bathroom out there in the world someplace, I'll catch the glint myself on the raised ridges on either side of my mouth area, the dully shining skin. Pretty bad, I said. No, she said, with a little catching laugh in her breath. You know I work doubles on weekends out of Loma Linda, though. No, I said. My conceptions of people's outside lives are pretty crude, basic two-dimensional stuff. I do, she said. Anyway, my sister's friend works reconstructive. They had somebody like you in there just last week. Our eyes met. This doesn't happen for me often with anybody. It felt so naked. I tried to stay with it, to be present for it, to see where it would go. They can do so many things now, honey, she said, returning her eyes to her work. She was prepping some swabs for my cleaning. It's a lot they can do since he first got hurt. I know, I talked to them about it a couple years back. How long ago was that? She said, her gaze back on me pretty steady. You forget how well people know you when they know you. I opened a drawer on the left side of my desk, the personal business side, which doesn't see a lot of traffic. I moved some stuff around and found a few brochures. One was even from Loma Linda. Imagine. Vicki looked them over. They're in their own building now, she said. This one is from when they were still over in the main surgery building. The western desert gives way a little. Marsh gas, some smell of the wind. Dawn face mask. Trace back. Continue due east. Dig shelter. Anyway, she said, you could call them. And she swabbed my cheeks with some glycerin on a compress, so gentle it barely stung at all. It's your grandmother, Dad said on the phone after we'd finished up our opening moves today. Last night, she died last night. When you shoot yourself in the face with a Marlin 39A, one thing you don't think about is what your father will tell his mother when it becomes necessary to tell her something's happened. My grandfather on my father's side had been dead for over a decade. He had a heart attack one day in the supermarket. I'd overheard my dad explaining it to Mom after he came home early from work. The aisle was empty. It was early, he said. He was lying there for a little while. I was 12. They took me to the funeral at Oak Park, and I stood quietly imagining what the screams would sound like if the coffin's lid sprung open and something crawled out. Grandma stayed all alone in the giant house where my dad and his brothers had grown up. When, eventually, the climb up the stairs got to be too much, she moved downstairs, and the second floor became an accidental museum commemorating the last day anybody lived there. I used to hide out up there when we'd visit and try to get lost in the dusty, abandoned feeling of a place where nothing ever happens. What they told my grandmother after the accident was that I had been in a car accident and that everyone else in the vehicle had been killed. This was an important detail because lots of people get into car accidents and come out basically okay. They break arms, or they get concussions, maybe they get brain damage and can't remember things like they used to. But they don't look markedly different unless maybe their face hits the windshield and the car catches fire and everybody else inside gets burned to death. These were two of the details my father had asked me to memorize in case Grandma ever asked me about the accident and to mention if she did. She's not going to ask you to talk about it. I know she won't, he said, but in case she does. Conan the Barbarian has no parents, as far as I know, but in my mind he was my model, trying to stand strong and brave, sword in hand, black hair flowing. In truth, I have very little hair on my head now, and the hair I do have tends to clump in stringy clusters, but if my eyes are closed and my concentration is strong, I can form a different picture of myself in my mind. So this was what I did, standing by the waist-high desk where the phone was. I closed my eyes, and I concentrated. Dad was getting ready to tell me about the funeral plans. I knew I could make it easier for him if I tried hard enough. It isn't really much of a mystery, this occasional need I have to comfort my father. I did something terrible to his son once. Grandma lived a long time, I said. 10 plus years since Dad took me down to Ray's on that open-ended mission where nobody got revenge and nothing got resolved, and a whole lot of empty ground in the space from now to then. I have a theory: the less you say when someone dies, the better. Leave everything as open as you can. Thanks, Sean, he said. For me, this is hard. It's terrible, I said. No, he said. It's all really hard, but what No, Sean, I don't like to say this. I know you loved your grandmother, and she loved you, but pausing here. Some things you practice a few times, but it doesn't make them any easier. I could hear it now. We don't think you should come to the funeral. I know that's... He just left it there for a second. It's really hard to... When anger rears up in me, I have a trick I do, where I picture it as a freshly uncoiled snake dropping down from the jungle canopy and heading for my neck. If I look at it directly, it'll disappear. But I have to do it while the snake's still dropping or it will strike. This sounds like something they teach you in therapy at the hospital or something, but it's not. It's just a trick I found somewhere by myself. Once you've looked at a deadly thing and seen it disappear, what more is there to do? Walk on through the empty jungle toward the city past the clearing. It's okay, Dad, I said evenly. I took stock of how I really felt, found all the various threads, saw which way they all ran. Dad, it's okay. I get it. It's all right. And I do get it. I am not a welcome presence at a funeral, no matter whose it is. If I let myself stay mad about that, I will go insane. On the other end, my father, now an orphan, was crying. Thank you, Sean, he said. I don't mean to be awful to you. It's hard for me to ask. It's really hard. Your grandmother was so happy back in those early days, back when the little silence that followed wasn't my dad's repetitive stutter. I could hear him entering a space he usually tried to avoid, finding himself on the other side of a door he wouldn't normally open. I followed him in. When you were a baby, he said at last. He sounded like he was choking. It's okay, Dad, I said. It'll be okay. Clan Scarecrow, I saw, penned in neat script on a little card inside my head.
I love that scene.
Thank you.
It's so revealing, and on a deeper level, with that so visceral and emotional on the surface, skin level. You think Sean and his dad loved each other?
No, I mean, for whatever reason, Sean lives inside his head, right? Sean, I think, has some trauma from having been scooted around a lot as a kid. There's a lot of movement, and that's the sort of thing you can't really, quantify what happens, when you move from school to school when you're small. Some kids roll with it and some struggle. But I think that the traumatic event, I think, has placed a distance between them that they can't really leap across. I think Sean has a better view of his dad than his dad has of him.
And the mother seems, maybe like many mothers, she kind of wants to go back in time maybe a little bit, and maybe make it all.
No,
different.
I think there's more to her than I really show.
Yeah.
I think she's quiet, a quiet person. But I don't. That indicates an absence. I think it actually indicates a big presence.
Conan.
Yeah.
That's why did you grasp onto the Conan motif runs throughout.
Yeah. He's a big fan of Conan the Barbarian, who was a hero invented by Robert E. Howard, this Texas writer who shot himself in his mother's driveway at the age of 30. His connection is kind of clear, right? But also Conan is like sort of this merciless barbarian, right? And I was interested. He mentions this. There's so much of my own stuff I was into as a preteen, early teenager. When I was going to comic book stores, and I want to qualify this. Like comics culture now is an awesome place of diversifying. But for the longest time, post the 80s, right? It was really this boys' club that was kind of gross in a lot of ways. But in the 70s, that wasn't really, it hadn't all settled in yet. It was a loose, weird place to be into comics. It wasn't, it wasn't, there weren't guys circling the wagons and telling you what was or was not a good use of comics, because there weren't enough of them, right? It was a very small subculture. The comics guys were not making money. And I would go to the stores, and they were run by these guys who were sort of like the prototype of the Simpsons comic book store guy, but they weren't exclusionary guys for the most part. They were actually pretty into it. If you asked the right questions, they would hip you to stuff. But the guys who would buy the Conan comic books, which was a Marvel comic, it was the same line as all the other comics, they didn't buy other comics, right? Glenn Danzig is one of these guys. Runs directly to the comic book he's into, right? And doesn't even see, there's a Hulk comic over here, there's Fantastic Four over there, and they've been really good lately. But the Conan guys go directly to the Conan, they grab Savage Sword of Conan and Red Sonja, and they go directly to the cash register, right? And it was kind of, this is the sort of zealotry that really appeals to me because I'm Catholic, and and because I lack it, because I don't ever just get into one kind of music and say that all other kinds of music suck, right? It's like I listen to lots of stuff, right? So I can't say, well, the romantic era of classical music is the good one, and the other ones are not interesting. No, I have to know about everything with dilettante, right? In that way, or there's nicer ways to describe dilettantism, but then people who are like, no. Give me the guy who's like, Beethoven, he was the best, so I just listened to Beethoven. And you think, wow, that's awesome. So Conan is sort of a symbol of that to me. He's this sort of very pure figure, of the kind of figure somebody finds and goes, that's my icon, that's who I will cleave to.
It's funny you mentioned your Catholicism, because I was going to ask you, I was going to preface this. This is my Gerardo Rivera question. Sir, are you a Satanist? Because you had
No.
you had that great declaration at the end of the song of the greatest death metal band out of 10, and you talk a little bit about, there are a couple of references not to Satanism but to sort of allusions to almost like the role playing game, be careful about playing your records backwards kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's a
there's that great line about the unaligned cleric.
Yeah. And I like that. So, an unaligned cleric. So in D&D, you know what alignment is?
Yeah, well, not in that context.
In D&D, alignment looks like this. So there's a grid. I want you to picture how many are there? There's 3 squares per line, right? In a square with 9 squares in it, right? 9 little squares. So there's lawful, there's neutral, what is it? Chaotic, thank you very much. So you can be lawful good, lawful neutral, or lawful evil. You can also be neutral good, neutral, right? Or neutral evil, or you can be chaotic good, and so forth. And so when I was 12, the one time I tried to play D&D as a kid and discovered that, I've told the story a lot of times, the reason I didn't go on with D&D was our party got attacked by a ghost in the first session. I thought, I'm going to waste this ghost. And the dungeon master said, well, no, nobody here has enough hit points to fight a ghost. And I said, well, everybody's got a chance. But that's not how D&D works. In fact, not everybody has a chance. So I died instantly. I was like, this game is garbage, right? so I never played again, until recently. But yeah, so an unaligned cleric, you can't actually be unaligned, right? But so I like the idea of somebody who has, you could write your own modification of D&D where you deferred alignment, right? In some way, you'd have to come up with a bunch of new rules. But I like the idea of unaligned, somebody who's neither lawful nor unlawful nor anything. Somebody who's off the grid.
I'm glad there seem to be people in the audience who know what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
I got off track there. A little bit of a cliche question, but I think one that merits asking, given the fact that the entire narrative takes place inside of Sean's head. What about questions of the reliability and unreliability of the narrator, and how you flirted with that?
I'm generally not interested in unreliable narrators anymore. Right. I sort of feel like Baltimore's on Edgar Allan Poe kind of did enough with that, to keep us busy. And I think it's an overplayed trope a lot. It's like when I read a book and suddenly I have to question whether I believe what the guy's saying. This is kind of childish of me, but then I get a little frustrated.
Yeah, there's moments though, when you're referring to the accident, which I guess is a
this is the
fair description of.
It's not that he's unreliable. It's that you don't know how much he's actually telling you.
Yeah.
I think everything he tells you is true. He's honest. He's very honest. Right? He's painfully honest. But he's not sure what he thinks, and he's not sure of himself, and he's kind of unaligned in his own way. His motives are obscure to him in many cases, and I think in that way he's as realistic a character as I can think of. That we don't, when you're doing the interviews for an album, you say, "Oh, why did you decide to write about wrestling?" And you go, "I don't know. I sat down one day and I started, playing the guitar and sang a line, and it happened to be about wrestling, so it would be weird for the next line of the song to not be about wrestling. So I sang the next line, right? And then the song needs to all be about the same subject, or it's not a very good song. And so, but people are looking for I wanted to express this truth, and so I sat down and wrote it. But that's never the case. You write because you were in a certain mood, or you saw something that inspired you, you didn't know where it was going, right? And I think that's something Sean knows, but he also knows that the actual truth of what drives you is probably obscure to you.
And I think the other side of the unreliable narrative question coin is the memories. And,
Yeah.
and you deal a lot with
That's
memories.
right.
And you sort of scratch that itch, I think, with dealing with memory, Sean's memory, the memories that Sean's hearing from other people around him,
Right.
as this backward story unfolds. Do you want to talk a little bit about the role of memory?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in high school, I was a big Faulkner reader, and so that Faulkner's use of memory and the way that we configure the things that we remember is pretty important. And Berryman too was my other favorite. He was also big on that. But I mean, I think the memories are like music. That you listen to them in various times of your life, and they read different, right? They're not solid. They're not totemic, right? They're actually you wrest different meanings from them. You realize new things about them. You remember. You can have these pretty scary Joan Crawford moments where you go, oh, I always thought of that as like. Here's the thing. I'm a grown up with 2 kids now, right? So when I think of my parents' divorce when I was 5, they had 2 kids, right? And that feels different to me when I imagine what it must have been like in their heads than it did when I was 21 and I had no kids, right? It felt, you sort of, the way you remember your parents' actions, I don't think you get a clearer vision. You just get more takes on it, and you recognize things as musical, as having various ways of listening, various places to put your focus, and so there's a lot of that in there, the way he remembers things. But he's got this obsession with trying to sort of clearly, lucidly describe a memory without shading it too much. Right? He wants to actually just have a scene.
Because you're also dealing with a period of his memory where he was, highly medicated.
Yeah.
My last question before I ask you if you want to read anything else again is sort of a question I asked this morning to the panel of musicians who are also writers about the role of music in the narrative, and even not lyrics, but the way you play with music inside a narrative, even referring to things like going back, radio, which is another whole concept that our kids won't freaking understand. So how do you use, without saying, oh, John Darnielle, he's going to have to write that music. So how do you deal with
it's inconceivable to me to write something in which music doesn't figure. It's been such a huge part of my life since I was very small, and so I can't, for something to not have a musical component is weird to me. I understand the world in terms of the music in it in a lot of ways, but also for him, he's got this hearing damage. But there's also he's very interested in texts, in trying to wring meaning from them, right? And for me, the chief texts that I have been looking at most of my life have been albums, right? And so it's sort of a way in, It's like it's not so much about the sound of the music, a lot of the type of this, the vibe.
Right. I love the scene when Sean is, I forget what he's up to, but he's in a parking lot and he comes across the teenager boys and they're, I don't know, smoking dope or smoking something or drinking beers. And you've got the song by Styx, Renegade.
Yes.
Now, and I think, what would you say about being cautious about those kinds of those little nuggets about, well, you don't want, Renegade by Styx, the lyrics can start going through your head, and you start, what's the author trying to say about this moment, because he's used this particular song, he's named it.
Yeah, but then I'm going to think of the lyrics, I'm thinking of the sound.
Yeah.
And I think about, the other thing is there's a lot about this book, it's been really gratifying that people can find something in it because it's so local to my Southern California memories, like a truck playing KLOS, playing Renegade in a liquor store parking lot. Anybody who grew up where I grew up sees that very vividly, right? Can see exactly that parking lot, whether it's in LA or Chino or La Puente or Claremont or Pomona or wherever. It's the same liquor store. It has the same kind of sign. It's like local architectural tendencies and stuff. And the radio station, we had rock radio in SoCal was its own thing, and played Renegade to the bitter end. So.
Yeah, but yet those details transcend because I make a note here on the end papers about we're almost exactly the same age, and you've got heavy metal, Conan, and wrestling,
right?
And I've got punk, Batman, and This Week in Baseball. It's different ways we spent our Saturday afternoons. Watching This Week in Baseball with Mel Allen versus
I got into This Week in Baseball in my mid-20s.
But yet, even though they're the same. music.
That's right, the points of contact.
Yeah, right. Do you want to read a little something?
Sure, a little something.
Yeah.
See what I can do. We'll read about the tapes. I stopped listening to tapes at some point. It was a phase. You either get used to noises in your head, or you learn to focus instead on whatever other noises happen to be present in the room, like the air conditioner or the bells. Still, I kept them, and they're arranged neatly on top of the dresser in my bedroom, which means Vicky dusts them once a week. They look like museum pieces now. Chaos, Blood, Black Lake, Rexecutioner's Dream. Sean at 16 thought Rexecutioner's Dream was the greatest thing he'd ever heard, something so strange and different, it seemed like a message from another realm. It had cover art, but the art was glued onto the inner sleeve of a standard issue blank cassette. The spine was hand lettered. It was the product of someone's hard work, a vision brought into the world of real things, a dream disguised in a crude plain package. When the hate mail started up, I had an impulse of the sort I rarely get anymore, the kind the antidepressants I'm supposed to be taking would probably keep completely and indefinitely in check. I was sitting up in bed, reading the postcard that began, "You aren't going to hear us when we come in, you ugly reject," trying to see if reading it several times over would quiet the real fear it gave me. You're just going to feel the pain. And the light through the window caught the edge of something hard and shiny across the room, and I thought, if any of these have a return address in them, I'm going to send that person a tape. Something random from on top of the dresser. Fire caverns. Just put it into a jiffy bag and mail it. I got as far as sliding one of the tapes out from the row and setting it down on my desk next to the letters like an arrow in the quiver. But of course, nobody threatening to kill me was about to send a return address. I hope they give you the chair. And then I pictured myself sending some incomprehensible tape to a stranger whose hatred for me was a pure flame, bright and clear. Someone who'd hear a package dropping through his mail slot one day and find when he opened it this unexpected, undecodable thing. And he'd turn it over in his hands, trying to make sense of it, and he'd feel all shaken up or confused or a little scared. And I said out loud, no, and did the deep breathing exercises I learned in relaxation class when I was 17. I made ready to tear the threats all into neat squares, but instead I put them in a manila envelope and tucked it into the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, down among the scenes and byroads almost no one's ever seen. More mail came in the following weeks. I wondered if swells in volume meant there'd been some editorial in a local paper somewhere about a gunshot survivor who'd lured a couple of teenagers to a frozen grave. Maybe even a human interest story on the evening news, because it did seem to come in waves. There were appeals to my conscience to turn myself in prayer groups letting me know they were interceding with God on my behalf. I stopped reading this stuff fairly quickly. I either filed them, or if an envelope looked a little fat and came from an unknown source, I'd hand it over unopened to my lawyer, who I assumed put them all into a filing cabinet of her own. But Dear Freak was the first one, out ahead of the actual news, a confusing and frightening intrusion into the dull quiet of my life, the first I had heard about any of this. The crazy road trip letters from Lance and Carrie had stopped suddenly, and I thought maybe their parents had made them come home, and there'd been radio silence for a week, 2 weeks, and then Dear Freak with the internet now, one of about 7 letters from strangers that came that day, some supportive and some caustic, a stack around which the postman or somebody at the post office had put a rubber band. I remember the rubber band because I reflexively threaded it from my pinky around my thumb to my index finger, pistol style, and shot it across the room.